What happens when an unqualified FBI director faces a brilliant Congresswoman armed with devastating questions about cover-ups, botched investigations, and political vengeance? Can one hearing expose the complete breakdown of America's premier law enforcement agency? And why did Representative Jasmine Crockett's systematic dismantling of FBI Director Kash Patel become the defining moment that proved the FBI has been weaponized against American citizens? In a packed House Judiciary Committee hearing room, the most controversial FBI director in American history sat across from one of Congress's most formidable questioners. What unfolded was not just political theater, it was a devastating expose of how the FBI has been transformed from a law enforcement agency into a political weapon. Today, we're breaking down every explosive moment from this historic hearing, analyzing how Representative Crockett systematically destroyed Patel's credibility while exposing scandals involving Jeffrey Epstein files, the Charlie Kirk investigation disaster, and the politically motivated firing of veteran FBI agents. By the end of this analysis, you'll understand why this hearing represents a turning point in American politics, the moment when the FBI's political weaponization was fully exposed, and why Crockett's declaration that Patel should be told bye-bye resonated with millions of Americans who no longer trust their own government. To understand the explosive nature of this hearing, you need to understand how Kash Patel became FBI director and why his appointment was controversial from day one. Patel's path to the FBI directorship was unlike any in the agency's history, and that's exactly why Representative Crockett was prepared to dismantle his credibility piece by piece. Traditional FBI directors come from within law enforcement, typically with decades of experience as FBI agents, federal prosecutors, or other law enforcement roles. They understand the culture, the procedures, and the delicate balance between law enforcement and political neutrality that has defined the FBI since J. Edgar Hoover's era ended. Kash Patel had none of this background. His appointment was purely political, a reward for his loyalty to Donald Trump during various political controversies rather than recognition of law enforcement expertise. This lack of traditional qualifications would become the foundation for Crockett's systematic attack on his legitimacy. What made Patel's appointment even more controversial was the context in which it occurred. Trump appointed him specifically to clean house at the FBI and to pursue what Trump called retribution against his political enemies. This wasn't subtle. It was an openly declared mission to politicize the nation's premier law enforcement agency. Patel had made his reputation not through law enforcement work, but through his role in defending Trump during the Russia investigation and other political controversies. He was known more for his media appearances and political activism than for any expertise in federal law, enforcement, or national security. When Patel took over the FBI, career agents and intelligence professionals were alarmed. They saw his appointment as a direct threat to the FBI's independence and professionalism. Many veteran agents began looking for other positions or early retirement rather than serve under someone they viewed as a political operative rather than a law enforcement professional. This background set the stage for what would become one of the most contentious congressional hearings in FBI history. Representative Crockett was not just questioning an FBI director, she was challenging the entire concept of politicizing America's premier law enforcement agency. The hearing began with what would become one of its most explosive exchanges. Representative Crockett's questioning about the Jeffrey Epstein files and why the FBI under Patel's leadership had refused to release information that could implicate powerful figures in Epstein's network. The Jeffrey Epstein case represents everything that's wrong with how justice works for the wealthy and connected versus ordinary Americans. Epstein's network included politicians, business leaders, and celebrities who allegedly participated in or enabled his sex trafficking operation. The American people deserve to know who was involved, but the FBI under Patel has been stonewalling these releases. When Crockett pressed Patel about why more Epstein files hadn't been released, his response was classic bureaucratic deflection. He claimed that all credible and legally permissible information had been released, language that Democrats on the committee immediately recognized as code for "we're protecting powerful people from embarrassment." What made this exchange particularly damaging was Crockett's preparation. She didn't ask vague questions about transparency. She asked specific questions about specific files and specific decisions not to release information. This forced Patel to either admit that the FBI was protecting powerful figures or to make increasingly implausible claims about legal restrictions. The subtext of this exchange was clear to everyone in the hearing room. The FBI under Patel was more interested in protecting powerful figures who might be implicated in the Epstein network than in providing transparency to the American people. This wasn't about legal technicalities. It was about political protection for the connected elite. Crockett's questioning revealed that the FBI's definition of credible information seemed to correlate perfectly with information that wouldn't embarrass powerful political figures. Information that might implicate ordinary citizens was released, while information about politicians and celebrities remained classified under increasingly creative interpretations of legal restrictions. What made this particularly infuriating to committee Democrats was that Patel had been appointed specifically to increase transparency and to clean up the FBI. Instead, he was using his position to provide even more protection for the powerful figures who had enabled Epstein's crimes. The Epstein files controversy also highlighted the broader problem with Patel's leadership. He was making decisions based on political considerations rather than law enforcement priorities. The FBI's job is to investigate crimes and provide information to prosecutors and the public, not to protect powerful figures from embarrassment. If the Epstein files controversy showed Patel's willingness to protect powerful figures, the Charlie Kirk investigation disaster revealed his fundamental incompetence as a law enforcement leader. This botched investigation became the centerpiece of Crockett's systematic demolition of Patel's credibility. The assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk should have been a straightforward investigation for the FBI. A prominent political figure had been murdered, and the Bureau should have conducted a professional, methodical investigation to identify and apprehend the perpetrator. Instead, Patel turned the investigation into a public relations disaster that embarrassed the FBI and potentially compromised the case. His decision to prematurely announce that a suspect was in custody, an announcement he later had to retract, showed a fundamental misunderstanding of how law enforcement investigations should be conducted. What made this disaster even more damaging was how the suspect was ultimately apprehended. Instead of FBI investigative work, the suspect was turned in by his own family members. This meant that Patel's premature announcement wasn't just wrong, it was based on investigative incompetence rather than solid police work. Representative Crockett used this disaster to devastating effect during her questioning. She didn't just criticize Patel for the premature announcement. She systematically dissected how the FBI under his leadership had failed at every stage of the investigation. Her questions revealed that the FBI had been slow to respond to the initial crime scene, had failed to develop solid leads through traditional investigative methods, and had ultimately solved the case not through professional police work but through lucky circumstances. When the family turned in the suspect, the Charlie Kirk investigation became a perfect example of how Patel's lack of law enforcement experience was directly harming the FBI's effectiveness. A more experienced FBI director would have understood the importance of methodical investigation and would never have made premature announcements that could compromise ongoing cases. What made Crockett's questioning particularly effective was how she contrasted Patel's public relations approach to the investigation with traditional FBI methods. She showed that Patel was more interested in getting credit for solving the case than in actually solving it professionally. The disaster also revealed splits within the Republican Party about Patel's leadership. Even some of Trump's allies had criticized Patel's handling of the Charlie Kirk investigation, giving Crockett bipartisan ammunition for her attacks on his competence. Perhaps the most damaging part of Representative Crockett's questioning focused on Patel's systematic firing of veteran FBI agents for what appeared to be purely political reasons. This issue struck at the heart of whether the FBI could maintain its independence and professionalism under politically motivated leadership. The FBI has always prided itself on being a professional law enforcement agency where agents serve regardless of which political party controls the White House. Career agents work cases based on evidence and law, not on political considerations. Patel's mass firing of veteran agents threatened this fundamental principle. What made these firings particularly troubling was their apparent connection to agents' previous work on Trump-related investigations. Agents who had worked on the Russia investigation, the January 6th investigation, or other cases involving Trump or his associates seemed to be disproportionately targeted for termination. Patel's justification for these firings was that the agents failed to meet the FBI's needs, bureaucratic language that could mean anything and therefore provided no real accountability for what appeared to be political retaliation. Representative Crockett's questioning exposed the devastating impact these firings were having on FBI morale and effectiveness. Veteran agents with decades of experience were being replaced by political appointees or newer agents who lacked the institutional knowledge and investigative experience needed for complex federal cases. The firings also sent a chilling message to remaining FBI agents: investigate Trump's illies at your own risk. This created a culture of fear within the FBI that was fundamentally incompatible with professional law enforcement. What made Crockett's questioning particularly effective was her focus on specific agents and specific cases. She didn't ask general questions about personnel decisions. She asked about specific veteran agents who had been fired and what their failures had been. Patel's responses revealed that he couldn't provide specific, non-political justifications for most of these firings. His answers fell back on vague language about meeting the FBI's needs, without explaining what needs weren't being met or how firing experienced agents would improve the Bureau's effectiveness. The political purge also represented a fundamental misunderstanding of how the FBI works. Unlike political appointees who serve at the pleasure of the president, FBI agents are supposed to be career professionals who maintain continuity across different administrations. Patel was treating FBI agents like political staff who could be fired for ideological reasons. The most powerful moment of the hearing came when Representative Crockett shifted from questioning Patel about specific controversies to delivering devastating personal testimony about what his leadership meant for ordinary Americans, particularly Black Americans who face threats from white supremacist and right-wing extremist groups. Crockett's testimony was personal, powerful, and politically devastating. She spoke directly about how she and her colleagues, particularly Black members of Congress, no longer felt safe from threats of right-wing extremism and white supremacy because they couldn't trust the FBI under Patel's leadership to take these threats seriously. This wasn't abstract political criticism. This was a member of Congress explaining that she didn't trust the FBI to protect her from death threats because the agency had been politicized to serve partisan rather than law enforcement purposes. Crockett specifically mentioned the FBI's perceived inaction on threats against her colleagues and domestic terrorism incidents at historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. These weren't hypothetical concerns. These were ongoing security threats that the FBI under Patel's leadership had failed to address adequately. Crockett's personal testimony also highlighted the racial dimensions of Patel's failures. Black Americans and other communities of color face disproportionate threats from white supremacist groups, and they need to be able to trust that the FBI will investigate these threats professionally rather than making decisions based on political considerations. Her testimony revealed that under Patel's leadership, the FBI appeared to be more focused on investigating Trump's political enemies than on addressing the genuine domestic terrorism threats that were targeting vulnerable communities. The personal nature of Crockett's testimony made it impossible for Patel to dismiss her concerns as partisan politics. She was speaking as an American who no longer trusted her own government to protect her from terrorist threats, a devastating indictment of Patel's leadership. The climax of this historic hearing came when Representative Crockett delivered what became the most quoted line from the entire proceeding. Her declaration that Kash Patel was the least qualified FBI director in the history of the FBI and that he should be told bye-bye. This wasn't just political rhetoric, it was the culmination of a systematic presentation of evidence about Patel's failures as FBI director. Crockett had methodically demonstrated his lack of qualifications, his botched investigations, his political firings of veteran agents, and his failure to protect American communities from domestic terrorism. The bye-bye comment became instantly viral because it captured what millions of Americans were thinking but hadn't heard expressed so directly by an elected official. Patel's failures were so obvious and so damaging that even a sitting member of Congress was willing to publicly declare that he should be removed from office. What made this moment particularly powerful was the contrast between Crockett's professional, evidence-based presentation and her final, direct verdict. She had spent the hearing building a systematic case against Patel's competence and legitimacy, and her final comment was the logical conclusion of that evidence. The bye-bye moment also represented something broader about American politics, the moment when elected officials stopped pretending that obviously unqualified political appointees deserved respect simply because they held high-ranking positions. Crockett's willingness to directly call for Patel's removal represented a new level of accountability in American politics. Instead of diplomatic language about concerns or questions, she was willing to state directly that Patel was harming the FBI and should be removed. The comment also resonated because it reflected the frustration of many Americans who had watched qualified public servants replaced by political loyalists who lacked the expertise needed to do their jobs effectively. The aftermath of this hearing revealed its significance as a turning point in American politics and the fight over the politicization of federal law enforcement. Representative Crockett's systematic demolition of Patel's credibility didn't just embarrass an FBI director. It exposed the broader problem of how political appointments had corrupted America's law enforcement institutions. The aftermath of this hearing revealed its significance as a turning point in American politics and the fight over the politicization of federal law enforcement. Representative Crockett's systematic demolition of Patel's credibility didn't just embarrass an FBI director. It exposed the broader problem of how political appointments had corrupted America's law enforcement institutions. The hearing demonstrated the power of thorough preparation and systematic questioning in holding political appointees accountable. Crockett's success wasn't based on political theater or grandstanding. It was based on careful research, specific evidence, and methodical presentation of facts that made Patel's failures undeniable. The viral nature of the bye-bye comment showed that Americans were hungry for direct accountability from their elected officials. Instead of diplomatic criticism, they wanted elected officials who were willing to call out obvious incompetence and corruption directly. The hearing also highlighted the ongoing battle over the politicization of federal agencies. Patel's appointment and tenure represented an attempt to turn the FBI into a political weapon, while Crockett's systematic criticism represented resistance to that politicization. For Patel, the hearing was a political disaster that undermined whatever credibility he had left as FBI director. His inability to provide convincing answers to Crockett's questions exposed his fundamental unsuitability for the position. For Crockett, the hearing represented another career-defining moment that established her as one of Congress's most effective questioners and accountability advocates. Her systematic approach to exposing Patel's failures provided a model for how elected officials could hold incompetent appointees accountable. The broader implications extend to American democracy itself. The hearing showed that democratic institutions could still function to expose corruption and incompetence, even when political appointees tried to evade accountability. Most importantly, the hearing demonstrated that the American people could still distinguish between professional competence and political loyalty when the evidence was presented clearly and systematically. The fight over the FBI's future continues, but Representative Crockett's systematic demolition of Kash Patel's credibility marked a crucial moment when political accountability triumphed over partisan protection of obviously unqualified officials.